Namaste and welcome to today's topic, spiritual quotient. Earlier, we started with intelligence quotient, IQ, emotional quotient, EQ, and then I also said that we would talk about the third aspect, and that is spiritual quotient. To understand this, we need to first think about spirituality. Now, what is spirituality? It is recognizing something that is greater than the human power. The pandemic has made us realize this, that however progressed human civilization is, there are certain aspects where humanity still has to go much further. So, what we are talking about here is a higher consciousness, a higher level of intelligence. And that is not something which is limited to what we can see or feel or touch, etc. That is, we are making a difference between the material and the spiritual. This is one basic difference which we need to make before we understand what we are trying to say. Earlier, what was called as the soul, the body and the soul, or it was called the spirit when people said that we don't want the word soul. These are all words, but the actual definition is very difficult. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, that certain things cannot be described in words, it cannot be put into human language. So, spirituality is that aspect. It is that belief, that recognition that whatever we have in the material world is one level of existence. We are within a boundary, and that is the material world. You cross over from that boundary, then you reach another expanse, you reach another area, and that is the spiritual world. Spirituality is something which we need to recognize, which we need to believe. So instead of calling it soul or spirit today, very often the preferred word is energy. So we say cosmic energy. The energy which is there in each one of us goes into a higher level and a universal level where every dimension of the universe has a potential energy. This is what we have to keep in mind. Now, Swami Vivekananda, when he went to the West, he spoke about the spiritual dimension of Hinduism. He said that unless you can prove it rationally, you can prove it scientifically, then no feeling or no emotion or no experience, including religion, has any validity. So the spirituality he was talking about was a spirituality which was acceptable to everybody. In fact, people in the West, especially the highly educated, very intellectual crowd, became his followers. And that is how Vedanta spread in the USA. Swamiji told us that spirituality is the treasure of India. It is our plus point. It is the great quality of India. So, what is the takeaway from our own culture? What is it that we can take from this thousands of years old culture? And that is the spiritual strength. So, if you want to increase your spiritual quotient, which would be a wonderful way of self improvement, we are talking about self improvement. The larger picture is self improvement. And these are all units of it. So, one of the units of self improvement is to enhance your spiritual quotient. You need to expand your spiritual uh, dimension, your spiritual belief or your recognition that beyond the material, there is something else. To be a complete human being, to gather human excellence, like the channel you're talking about, human excellence channel. So if we want to reach human excellence, then material is only partial. It is just a part of it. We need also the spiritual. In addition to the material, we need to make it the spiritual dimension active. By ignoring spirituality, by ignoring the spiritual aspect, by ignoring that we have to improve our spiritual quotient, we cannot be complete human beings. We cannot attain human excellence. We cannot gain self improvement. So, for self improvement, what we require is that we should be very clear about how much of spirituality we are able to imbibe. Now, if India is considered by Swami Vivekananda as a leader of spirituality, then you can imagine that there is a responsibility on every one of us that we need to disseminate this spirituality. We should not keep it only to ourselves. We should share. The pandemic has showed us that a person who has this inner strength, this inner dimension, is a better person because that person is able to achieve a complete life, even if the external sources of life, as we knew it, have changed. We cannot do exactly what we want. We cannot get what we want. These are all what the pandemic has taught us. And therefore, we can learn. We can see that spirituality here is the sustenance. It is the nurturing principle for a difficult time like the years 2020 and 2021. So, how should we increase our spiritual quotient? How should we make it better? I would like to share with you some few points on this. Uh, and we have to try all of them. Please remember that unless we try them out, unless we practice them, unless we repeatedly do them, no benefit comes. Self improvement is a small step by step process. It is not a jump from one end to the other. In one jump, we cannot achieve self improvement in 1 minute. It is a lifelong process of taking small steps. We go ahead with these small steps. And then finally, the product is what we get, and that is self improvement. That is the spiritual quotient being enhanced. So, some of these points. Now, the first point which I'm mentioning is we have to evolve. This evolution is from the lower self to the higher self. For instance, think of your single day, your activities. Now, what is it that you are doing? Many of us say that we are very religious, so we do puja, we do, our prayers, or we visit the holy places, we do namaz, etc. But are we doing it mechanically or are we doing it wholeheartedly? So the lower self is that when your mind is engaged in an activity, the mind is not concentrating on that activity. The mind is doing something else. So that is our lower self, which only talks about the basic human necessities like food, clothing, shelter, and so on and so forth. But we have to go to a higher self, a self which realizes the meaning of life, the purpose of life, the process through which we are living, and what is the ultimate destination of life. We know that the physical life is mortal, that it has an end, but there is something beyond it, or is it just the end? These are concerns which have occupied humanity from times immemorial. So we need to learn from their experiences. Every person who has thought about it and written about it, we have to think of them. You read a book by Aldous Huxley, it's called Perennial Philosophy. You will find that he has collected sayings of people from all over the world, every civilization, every tradition, and he's put the spiritual sayings here. He calls it perennial. perennial is something which continues forever. It is always a source of strength. It is always a source of learning. So when we read like this, when we listen to speeches, when we talk to each other about these things, and that is the spiritual ideas, then what happens is that the mind reaches another level. The level of consciousness goes higher. Aldous Huxley is a person who did a lot of work in this field. Sri Aurobindo did a lot of work on this field. And Sri Ramakrishna experienced the levels of consciousness, the various levels. He used to talk about the concept of bhavamukha. I'm sure if you listen to some of the Swamijis of the Ramakrishna order speaking, which are all available on YouTube, wonderful lectures, you will get an idea of what bhavamukha is, how it relates to spirituality, and what exactly evolving the mind to a higher state implies. Now, we have to also purify the mind. How should we purify the mind? We have to control the ego. Very often, Swami Srikantanandaji's lectures, I would hear the word, he would use, rascal ego. Very important. All of us have this rascal ego. If we perform something, if we achieve a little, then we become very proud of ourselves. We think that, oh, I've done a great thing. But that is a barrier to spiritual progress. If you want spiritual quotient to become higher, better, then the best way to do it is to control the ego and become selfless. We are so attached to the self, but that psychologists say, somebody like Lacan, if you read, you will find they say that that is only the childhood stage where your entire world is only yourself. As we grow up, as we mature, the world encompasses everything and everyone around, the entire universe. And not only the physical universe, the material universe, but also the spiritual dimension. This realization comes, when we have this, we get purity of mind. So controlling of the ego, controlling of things like lust and anger and all the other, negatives, making them into positive, realizing that we have these problems and being very honest with ourselves by saying, yes, I have this problem. Therefore, since I have the problem, I must know how to resolve it. Now, resolve, very often resolution of doubts. People have many doubts about spirituality. And very often spirituality is interlinked with religion. Today, religion sometimes has a very bad name because religion is being used as a weapon for something. But we must remember that religion itself is very good. It is very useful and it is very necessary. But we sometimes make a negative use of religion. The fault is ours, not the fault of religion. There is no fault in religion. All religions are equally true, and this can be proved by the spiritual dimension of religion. All religions have the spiritual dimension, and that is where what Sri Ramakrishna says comes true, that every religion is a path towards the final destination, towards the divine, or call it God or Almighty or whatever. So every religion is true. It is a different path. The difference is only in the path. The difference is not in the destination. So when we talk about such things, what happens is there is a doubt which comes to the mind by saying, is it really true that there is a spiritual dimension? Is it possible? Or is the body everything? Is the material world everything? But a little bit of example, a little connectivity with others. You see how the digital world is connected by what we call as the World Wide Web, WWW. Now, can we connect all created beings together and see them through the world wide web of, you know, the universe, not the world wide web of internet, but the universe, you will find a powerful connecting link. For instance, the energy level which is in me or which is in you sometimes will go out of the body when the body is no longer there. What happens to that? We know that energy is not created or destroyed. It becomes a part of the universal cosmic energy. The energy changes from one form to another form. So, what are we talking about? We are talking about that content, animate and inanimate world. Everything has energy. Look at the, you know, river which is flowing, full of energy. Look at all the things around you, and you will find that they have hidden energy. You strike two stones together, you get fire. So there is energy everywhere. So spiritual dimension involves all these. Unless you understand, you will not go further. So these lead to the purification of the mind. These leads to resolution of doubts. When we have a doubt, we read, we talk to each other, we try to think for ourselves. You know, very important concept is creative thinking. Maybe next time we will do this. So creative thinking, we have to think a lot. We have to look at all the dimensions of this. Then you will find that the doubts get resolved. For instance, Swami Vivekananda, you know, he came to Sri Ramakrishna with a whole lot of questions, so many doubts, and so much rigidity, no acceptance of anything which Sri Ramakrishna said. The Guru never tried to force him. We should not try to force ourselves. He said, time will resolve the issue. So the time will cure the doubts. It is good to get doubts. It is good to question, because questioning shows involvement. This is what we need to do. So having doubts is wonderful. Having negatives also is useful, because the negative gives us a chance to change to the positive. This is self-improvement. You know, we are evolving, we are progressing, we are going ahead. So unless we have something to discard in order to progress, in order to go ahead, then it is no use going. It is like going in a boat downstream. Very easy, you know, you're flowing with the water. But when you want to row the boat upstream, you have to work very hard. So you have to keep rowing. And then you realize that, oh, it's really worth going up because it's so challenging. It's such a great opportunity to show that we can do something. Spirituality is like that. It challenges you. And these challenges are in the form of your doubts and your negatives. Spirituality, one quality of cultivating spirituality is your ability to harmonize everything. Today, we find that the world is fragmented. We have a caste, creed, religion, nation, color, gender. We have so many differences. Everybody is bothered about the differences, but nobody wants to resolve. Instead, we want to increase these differences. But that is not a very good idea. We try to assert our privileges by saying, I deserve this, I want this. But nobody wants to earn something. You know, by hard work, we earn something. So unless we can harmonize all the negatives, unless we can harmonize all our emotions, all our thoughts, we are not proceeding towards spirituality. To increase your spiritual quotient, you need to learn the concept of harmonizing and do away with the concept of fragmenting, of dividing, you know, things and people and ideas, and always, you know, fighting for something. This does not show spirituality. The mantra of spirituality is the ability to let go. Let go is very important. I can give you a wonderful example of this. in the life of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother Sharda Devi. This example comes to my mind now. You can think of hundreds of such examples from different contexts. Sri Ramakrishna was very ill. Holy Mother was praying for his welfare, but he had throat cancer, and this was, almost the last stages. She went to the temple and she said that I will fast till he becomes better. Suddenly, she saw, in her mind's eyes, she saw that there were a series of pots, and all the pots were breaking one by one. Immediately, she got the idea. I've told you, critical thinking. She intuited, she understood that, the physical body is only impermanent. It is not permanent. Sri Ramakrishna is not going to recover from this illness. She let go. That feeling that, I have to hold on to his physical body, she did not do after this. She felt sad when he was no more, no doubt about it. But she felt his presence all around her. And therefore, we understand the concept of letting go. Swamiji, at the end of his life, he says, that I don't do anything. I don't perform anything. It is all what the mother does. There was a time when young Narendranath refused to go to the Kali temple by saying, why do you worship that idol? And that same Narendranath, as Swami Vivekananda, at the end of his life, saying that everything is mother's will. So letting go. You let go of your ego. You let go of all your negatives. You let go of your preconceived prejudices. That spirituality is terrible. That is a prejudice which we have, because spirituality makes us complete. If we want to be a complete human being, if we want to be really human, make the best of human life, then we need to increase our spiritual quotient. Without a spiritual quotient, we are only partially there. We use the term differently abled for people who are deprived of some part of the body or the other. We have all the parts, suppose, but we are also differently abled because our ability is only in the material sphere. Our abilities are not in the spiritual sphere. So we need to balance the material and the spiritual. Both need to be balanced. It is not as though we should only devote ourselves to spirituality. We have to live a comfortable life, a decent life. But the problem comes when this becomes a passion. Today, if you look around, you will find hundreds of lists coming out of the richest person in the world or the richest people in India and so on. So richness has a lot of respect. Everybody wants to become rich. But after becoming rich, then what? There's a beautiful poem in American literature, which says that he had everything. And suddenly, one day, everybody who was poorer than him was jealous of him. Suddenly, one day, he killed himself by shooting himself. Richard Corey, this is a very powerful poem which we have. Such things happen all the time, that in spite of having everything, because you are materialistic in your outlook, because you do not have the spiritual dimension, you feel an emptiness. You feel as though something is missing. Since this something is missing, you would like to, opt out of this life. That is not necessary. We can always work hard. We can always improve and become spiritual. So the spiritual quotient is a very important dimension of being a good human being, a complete human being. And these are all the steps by which we increase our spirituality. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, how should you pursue your spiritual, enhancement? He used the word in Bengali, mone, bone, kone. Mone is in the mind, Bone is in the forest and Kone is in the corner. That means spirituality should be a private affair. It is not for show. It is not for showing each other. We are trying to now tell each other that, I'm highly spiritual, or you wear a mala, or you wear a tilak, or you wear a, spiritual dress, or you wear a cap. And these, or you wear a cross. These dimensions show, okay, I'm very spiritual. But that is not really true, because spirituality is an inward dimension. It is nothing external. It is something which comes from within, manifesting that from within. That is what Vivekananda says. If you read that, you find that we need not look outside. The treasure is inside. The treasure is in an inherited culture. It is like, what we got from our ancestors. And this we have to make the best of by being, mone bone kone, by doing it privately. Very important idea is also to simplify it, to make spirituality simple and unostentatious. Like I said, not showy, private. Now, simple and unostentatious, we don't like that. We like to show off everything. I read a joke on WhatsApp recently that, nobody is allowed to eat in the house till the photograph of all the dishes are taken before breakfast, before lunch, before tea, and then they are posted on Facebook by saying that we are eating this today. One day there is no internet, the connection is gone. So everybody takes the dishes and parades in the neighborhood. They don't eat. They walk around on the road with the dishes because they want to show everybody. Now, this is what has become ostentation. So we should not be ostentatious. Spirituality implies simplicity and lack of ostentation, lack of showing off to everybody. So how can we do this? Again, I can give you an example of Sri Sharada Devi, simplicity. Now, these days we are getting wonderful, self-improvement videos and self-improvement slideshows on social media, which are greatly beneficial. You can find many examples in all this. Whatever I'm trying to share with you are all, in multiple illustrations available online. All you have to do is to search for them, look at them as an inspiration, and then try out the experiment yourself. I told you that the laboratory is with us. All the chemicals are with us. What we have to do is to start the experiment. And that is the process of self-improvement. So as I was telling you, the example of Sri Sharada Devi, she lived a very simple life in Dakshineshwar temple, which is very huge. She used to live in a small room where you can hardly fit a single person. But this was the Nahabad. But you could imagine she was totally happy here. This was her bedroom. It was her kitchen. It was her dining room. It was also her drawing room because guests would come there. Everything combined here. It was also the storeroom because everything was kept inside. Did she complain? She did not, because she believed in not showing off. Somebody gave, a devotee built a nice house for her. They said, you live there comfortably. She could hardly live there for a little time because her purpose in life was to look after the health of Sri Ramakrishna, not think of personal satisfaction or personal material comfort. That is why she came back to the Nabat again and lived there very joyously, never complaining. So you can see how important simplicity is. A really spiritual person, an example is Sri Sharada Devi. Young Sharada at this time, not the venerated mother of the organization, not the Guru Mata. But here is a young girl who is so happy. At 18, she comes here. She lives in that place. She is still in her 20s when she's continuing to live here. No desire, no demands, no privileging at all. You can see how highly spiritual this is. Then we have, of course, the concept of surrender. I started by saying spirituality is the recognition. If you recognize a higher power, you need to surrender to that higher power. That is spirituality. Now, example is given by Sri Ramakrishna in the form of a monkey baby and a kitten. Sri Ramakrishna says that the monkey is doing by self-effort. The monkey is clutching the mother and the mother is taking it from branch to branch. But when the kitten wants to move, it just says mew, mew. It doesn't do anything else. The mother comes and holds the kitten. The kitten does not make any effort. So in the case of the monkey, it is self-effort for surrender. And in the case of the kitten, it is complete surrender, no self-effort. This we have to do. Now, if you know, the system of reciting mantras in the Indian culture, you will also know at the end of each of these mantras, you have something called as Phalashruti. What result are you going to get if you do this? So we are talking about spirituality. Let me talk about 2 points. If we increase our spiritual quotient, what benefit shall we get? What will become of us? So a spiritual person, this is what is being said. A spiritual person is as gentle as a flower. I told you, harmonizing. Look at this. The spiritual person is as gentle as a flower and as strong as a thunderbolt. Thunderbolt comparable to atomic energy. Can you think? As strong as a thunderbolt, as gentle as a flower. So the ability to combine these things, remember what I told you in emotional intelligence, emotional quotient. You can see how these three are linked together. IQ, EQ, and SQ. Together, if we do them, we move towards self-improvement. So gentleness of the flower and strength, the power of the thunderbolt. This is what makes you really spiritual. Spirituality is not cowardice. Spirituality is not aggressiveness. Both these we have to keep in balance. And finally, the spiritual bliss. In the koshas, we have 5. We have the last one, Anandamaya kosha. What is that? The bliss, that circle of bliss. So spirituality brings us that circle of bliss. It brings us that steadiness, that stability, that joyousness always in our mind. Example of this we can see in the portrait of Sri Ramakrishna. In his samadhi, people would say that if you lose consciousness, your expression is very painful. But that didn't happen. What did happen to him? He was full of bliss. He was smiling. That beautiful facial expression which you see there has to be understood as his communing with spirituality. The highest level of spiritual consciousness he has reached, and the expression, the facial expression is telling you that it is very blissful. Although Sri Ramakrishna was a highly religious spiritual person, he was also very jovial. He is not always serious. Don't think that spirituality implies always sitting with a, serious expression. He used to crack so many jokes. Many jokes are there if you read the gospel. Since I don't have time, I can't tell you. Maybe someday we can talk about the parables in the gospel, the metaphors in the gospel. They'll be very interesting for self-improvement. So everybody laughs. In the gospel, you find again and again that, everybody is laughing. In brackets, it is written that everybody is laughing. So he used to make everybody laugh also. And the mother said the best thing. She said that whenever I used to see all this, the dancing and singing, she didn't go out and see. She saw from a small hole in the window. She said, my heart would be filled with a pitcher of bliss. The pitcher is a pot full of bliss, overflowing with bliss. This is what she said. Can you imagine? This is spirituality, seeing that bhajans being sung, seeing the way in which people would dance to the tune of the bhajan, including Sri Ramakrishna, she would feel that bliss. That is spiritual bliss. Meditation, thinking of your chosen ideal, these are all methods of spiritual bliss. And all these, if we practice, our spiritual quotient becomes better. We become well adjusted individuals and we become complete human beings. In whichever field we go, we find that we are able to fit in. This is what we have to keep in mind when we talk about self improvement by increasing our spiritual quotient. Thank you and namaste.